When Stranger Things finally came to an end in its 5th season, one of the most debated mysteries was not about whether Eleven got to live out her days in Iceland. Instead, it centered on something that never appeared at all. The new yellow-tinted dimension, the Abyss, is shown in Season 4 as the birthplace of the deadly monsters we've seen inhabit the Upside Down. But in the final battle, there were no Demogorgons, dogs, or bats. Their exclusion became so debated online that it helped give rise to an outlandish fan theory known as ConformityGate, which argued that the finale was deliberately artificial and that Vecna had succeeded in trapping the characters inside a fabricated reality. However, Netflix's documentary, One Last Adventure: The Making of Stranger Things Season 5, finally provides a clear answer as to where those monsters were hiding. They were not a secret clue waiting to be discovered, but were removed in a conscious creative effort as the Duffer brothers were concerned about demo fatigue. The documentary shows that in early writers' room discussions, it was assumed that the monsters would appear in the Abyss. Writer Paul Dichter states directly that there had to be some monsters there, and that it felt crazy for this newly introduced dimension to be empty. At this stage, the expectation was that some combination of Demogorgons, dogs and bats would feature in the final battle. The Abyss brought with it new danger in the physical body of the Mind Flayer, and a levelling up in scale that seemed likely to include the Demos, who have ruthlessly killed fan favourites like Eddie and Barb in previous seasons. However, as Season 5 and the scripts took shape, doubts began to surface about whether revisiting those creatures yet again would actually serve the story. Co-creator Ross Duffer can be seen questioning the assumption that the final fight needed familiar monsters at all. Demogorgons had already played a major role in Season 5, Episode 4, Chapter 4, Sorcerer, and the writing team were aware that repeating the same danger risked diminishing the impact of the Max Z Wunner. Writer and producer Kate Treefry questioned whether the audience would be experiencing Demogorgon fatigue at this point, and the idea resonated with the rest of the team, including Matt Duffer, who acknowledged that the season already had featured extensive monster action early on. This behind-the-scenes explanation complements what the Duffers had previously said in interviews after the finale aired. Matt Duffer had explained that Vecna did not need his army of creatures in the finale because the Mind Flayer itself was the ultimate weapon. Vecna was not expecting a sneak attack on home turf, and once the fight reached that point, he was confident enough to handle the threat of the party personally. From that perspective, the Demogorgons were still somewhere in the Abyss, but they were not necessary for this specific moment. One Last Adventure also confirms that Demogorgons weren't the only thing to get cut. A substantial midway battle had been planned between the Max Z and the final confrontation, which would have featured the characters fending off the familiar demos again before reaching Vecna. The Duffers ultimately chose to leave just the helicopter explosion at the Hawkins lab in the middle to avoid stacking repetitive action on top of what was already going to be an enormous finale.
What the hell just happened?
I have no idea, but I love it!
Ross Duffer says in the documentary that he wanted the final fight to clearly focus on the giant monster, because it was something new, while revisiting the Demogorgons felt increasingly familiar. The team had also discussed including a field of Demogorgon eggs as a visual tribute to James Cameron's Aliens in the same scene, but the finale was already dense. There was not room for every idea without overwhelming the episode. What makes the Demogorgon explanation in the documentary so notable is that it holds a mirror up to the Stranger Things fans who have been wildly theorizing since the finale ended. The infamous ConformityGate theory treated perceived narrative deviations as intentional signs that the reality shown after the final battle was artificial. According to believers, Vecna ultimately won and placed the characters under a distorted illusion, designed to pacify them. Hawkins appeared healed, the characters graduate, and life moves on. But that resolution was noted as suspicious. The empty abyss becomes part of that argument, a supposed clue that the world no longer follows its own rules. One Last Adventure undercuts that interpretation by showing how practical and openly debated the decision really was. The absence of Demogorgons was not designed to unsettle viewers or hint at a hidden ending. It was a product of a writer's room trying to avoid repetition and to ensure that the final battle felt distinct from everything that came before it. Even cast members wanted to go as big as possible one last time. Ross Duffer recounts how Finn Wolfhard pushed for a more active role in the Abyss fight and joked about not wanting to be handled a candlestick again. The writers clearly took his comments on board and gave his character Mike Wheeler a flair to fight the Mind Flayer with when the time came. This proves just how much of a team effort the final spectacle really was, and why it was key to focus on the biggest threat and wrapping up the character arcs rather than rehashing the demos. By the end of One Last Adventure, the absence of the monsters, which had fueled speculation and theories that the Duffer brothers had somehow forgotten they existed, is clearly explained and put to rest. The creative team chose to centre the finale on the Mind Flayer and Vecna, rather than relying on creatures the audience already knew well. The Abyss was meant to feel empty and ominous, creating a gap that fans interpreted as a hidden message, but it was, in reality, a collaborative creative choice. Stranger Things did not remove its monsters to signal an artificial reality, but it removed them to make sure its final battle went out with maximum impact and without repeating itself one last time.